When it comes to the latest episode of Yellowjackets, no one really wants to talk about the whole Jackie situation, but while that is avoided, Thais' alter ego decides to speak up, and Shauna reminds Jeff how she survived in the wilderness, as Lottie also shows that she is the real deal, both back in the 90s when she was just leading the girls, to now when she's leading what could be described as a cult. So as always, we're going to start in the past and work our way to the present. So, back in the 90s, when it comes to the whole eating Jackie thing, no one really wants to approach that topic. Crystal, who is Misty's new friend, she kinda does by talking about how she absorbed her twin in the womb, and that's how she kinda, I guess, justified it. But otherwise, everyone's trying to more so focus on Shauna's baby shower as, for lack of a better way of putting it, as ghetto as it is, but it's something to do. The girls are not only bored, but kind of reconcile with what they just did. And that includes them starting to hallucinate a little bit. Now, some of them are hallucinating just in hearing sounds, but when it comes to Thaisa, it seems that eating a person kind of amplified whatever this shadow walker being is, and now it's at the point where that shadow walker being is willing to talk to Van, and unfortunately it doesn't reveal any information, but it does seem increasingly that this being, whether we're talking about the 90s Thaisa or we're talking about modern times Thaisa, is very much a part of her, and whatever that symbol is, it's associated with that. But again, we learn absolutely nothing about this being. All it does is talk and try to communicate now. So, baby steps. Speaking of baby steps, we learn a little bit about Ben this episode, and specifically we meet his, I guess since he's likely dead now, ex-boyfriend Paul. And the gist of Ben's storyline this episode is he deeply regrets now going on this trip. He was actually going to quit before the trip happened and then just move in with his boyfriend, live a nice life, and I guess as time goes on, maybe wait for equality to happen so he can get married, maybe adopt a kid, who knows. All that is very much clear is that Ben is questioning all of his life decisions, and he may not be alone in that for too long. While Natalie, Thaisa, and others did eat Jackie, one thing which still kind of drives a lot of them apart, even if they were kind of together and one in that moment, is Lottie. Lottie gives Shauna as a baby shower gift a blanket with the symbol that of course freaks everybody out. And for whatever reason, Shauna starts to get a bloody nose, blood gets on the blanket, specifically around that symbol, and next thing you know, bugs are dropping out of the air, hitting the roof, hitting all the outside perimeter of the house. And when it comes to Natalie and Thaisa to a bit, they're like, so many red flags, we don't know why they're suddenly dying. Lottie, on the other hand, makes it seem like it's okay, it's an offering, and this leads to Van and others bringing the birds and putting them at her feet. And you can increasingly tell that while we know that Thaisa survives, while we know that Natalie survives, there is a chance that for those who didn't decide to come over to the dark side, for lack of a better way of putting it, those likely could be the next people who get eaten. And of course, my prediction is that Ben is definitely going to be on that list, especially because he's a man and he probably has a lot of meat on him. So, that would be a good meal. I wonder if you get demonetized for talking about cannibalism. Not that I'm even there yet, but let's move on. So, getting family in modern times, let's start off with Misty, Walter, and the person who they're interviewing to learn more about Natalie. That person ends up being Randy, and in case you've forgotten, Randy is Jeff's best friend since maybe middle school, high school, elementary. Either way, Misty's known him a long time, so with that, she decides, you know what, she's going to hand off interrogation to Walter. She gives him a Bluetooth piece so she can feed him questions, and at first, Walter is a little uncomfortable doing this, especially when Misty tells him to hit Randy. But as Walter gets into it, you can tell that Misty starts to get a little bit attracted to Walter. Now, Unfortunately, they don't really learn much in a way from Randy besides knowing that purple people came and probably took Natalie. But they do learn that they did swipe their credit card on one of the vending machines. So with that, they at least got a location they could possibly investigate since, as we've seen, Walter has hacking abilities, and since he knows where the card was registered to, his thought is, okay, let's take a road trip. To which you can tell Misty is still kind of iffy about Walter and the way he does things, but he's consistent, helpful, wants to spend time with her. So I want to say this is kind of new to her and kind of confusing and uncomfortable, but at the same time, she kind of likes it. Which you could probably say the same thing about Natalie. Being in Lottie's camp is very much a complicated thing for her. As we saw in the past, Lottie and Natalie rarely ever have seen eye to eye. And now with Lottie having this whole camp with a beekeeping thing, home private cabin that stays locked because, safety reasons, and having these people who kind of worship Lottie in a way, or at least see her as some kind of spiritual guide, she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand how you can go from being one of the craziest people on the team to now being someone who, perhaps because of that trauma, is now trying to guide people spiritually to a better life. It's mind-boggling to her. And what probably really bugs her out is that Lisa, the one who Natalie stabbed when she was formerly restrained, she somehow, throughout all the therapy or whatever Lottie has done with her, figured out a way to make it so that even though she's been stepped on for most of her life and then is given a weapon to possibly hurt Natalie, she doesn't do that. She forgives Natalie. She embraces and hugs Natalie. And with that, Natalie, I think she's starting to get it. And with that, I'm not going to say that she's going to stop this vendetta against Lottie, but she may actually see what value she has beyond whatever these people that are currently dealing with Lottie are getting. Now, with that said, just as Taissa is having this issue with the demonic occult being coming back in her life, and then of course Travis also had the issue, so is Lottie now, since her beehive went from having bees, honey, and just being this flourishing little thing to now being filled with blood for reasons that can't be explained. This leads us to the last topic, which deals with Shauna, Jeff, and Kevin to a certain degree. Shauna and Jeff are in this place with their marriage where both aren't completely sure what happened to them, not just because of the cheating, but also they're not sure when they became so boring and middle-aged and played it safe. In Jeff's mind, he wonders, is this what triggered the affair? And for Shauna, that doesn't seem to be the case. And what is perhaps the best example to show why that isn't the case is, or maybe it is, depending how you look at it. When Shauna and Jeff are heading to go on some spontaneous trip that Jeff wanted to do, they get carjacked. And the only reason they get carjacked is because Jeff allows them to. Sean is able to get the gun out of the carjacker's hand, but then Jeff stops Shauna from perhaps getting control of the situation. This pisses her off in a way, especially because one of Callie's stuffed toys went in the minivan. So she decides to take it upon herself to go to one of the local, I forgot what they're called, but where they strip cars down for parts. She goes there, threatens to own and gets the car back, much to Jeff's amazement. And the only way that Jeff kind of tries to match Shauna's energy is by going to Kevin and trying to put the fear in him about talking to Shauna about the whole Adam situation. And unfortunately for Jeff, because Kevin knows about the affair, and with that, Kevin pushes Jeff into a position of lying, you can see that Jeff, once he realizes he doesn't have power in the situation, he kind of backs down. He tries to maintain the lie, but he's a terrible liar, so all he does is just seem very guilty. But On a positive spin, with Shauna getting that car back, she's able to get Callie's little stuffed animal and maybe getting that stuffed animal back for their daughter, who may or may not have known about the carjacking, could allow for some type of healing in that relationship, even though with her talking to Kevin's associate, who knows if that's even going to matter in the long run. So in terms of highlights, the first highlight for me is that Misty may have a little boyfriend. And it's just a highlight because I feel like with Misty, finding someone who is her match has never been an easy thing. So when it comes to Walter, who is also someone who's kind of a notable detective, who compliments her in many ways and even seems to match her crazy whenever it calls for it, she has somebody that's good. And even though it's kind of unrelated, I also feel like the chemistry between Christina Ricci and Elijah Wood is good. And I don't know if it's because they're both child actors who came into their adult years and are still acting or what, but there's some type of understanding there between them that makes their connection seem way deeper than just what their characters have on screen. Not to say that they're gonna do anything in real life, because I think Christina Ricci's divorced, but I don't know if Elijah Wood is, but that's beside the point. All that matters is that Misty has found someone who perhaps can be the boyfriend that she has been looking for, but seemingly all in the wrong places. The next highlight for me is that when it comes to Thaisa, we're getting an increasing amount of information. Not enough to really say we're getting real answers, but at the very least, the trajectory that she's on, we may actually learn something notable by the end of the season. Following that up as a highlight is Ben's regrets, and the main reason why that's a highlight is because more than likely Ben died. He either got eaten, maybe a bear attacked him, who knows. But with featuring Paul and kind of getting us a taste of who he could have been and what he lost because of this trip, it could make it so that when he dies, it's less of a shit happens type of situation and more of an emotional moment. I'm not saying it's going to be an emotional moment because Ben has been pretty much bound to the cabin or his bed for most of this season thus far and hasn't really done or said anything worth noting, but you know, we have to celebrate attempts. The next highlight for us is just getting why Lottie is a spiritual leader. And I think one of the things we have to remember is that when it comes to Lottie's upbringing, between being heavily medicated by her parents, them having to go to shock therapy, and just seeing perhaps the worst side of psychiatry, you can understand why she tries to be gentle with people, why she tries to be, or rather use spirituality to try to help people heal and talk therapy and stuff like that. And that's because it wasn't something that seemingly was afforded to her, even though her parents could have afforded so much more than what they've given her. So when it comes to people like Lisa, who may not, at least they don't seem to be rich, though who knows how much money any of those people that are part of Lottie's cult have, but that's a whole different thing for a different episode. Point is, I feel like Lottie really proved herself to show that because of everything she went through, she's trying to give people what she didn't have. And in the process of this, in the 90s, we saw a taste of it so that she kind of got the formula. And by modern times, it seems that she has it perfected. Now, granted, the way that Lisa and Natalie's conversation went, there's probably people who tried her before because either they became obsessive, possessive, or else maybe Lottie brought up some demons that decided to go and attack Lottie. But point of the matter is, right now, Lottie's really proven herself as a character to be of worth, and I appreciate her. So, last highlight for me is adult Shauna, and that's because for a good part of season 1 and even part of season 2 before this episode, when you compare the two Shaunas, I would say neither one was necessarily a highlight of the show, but at the same time, you can see the potential of both. Back in the day, Shauna, with all the drama considering her sleeping with Jeff, which was Jackie's boyfriend off and on, and then her being the one that triggered the cannibalism, you could easily forget what she started or what she encouraged just because she wasn't the loudest, the most out there, or even the most prolific. You could say the same thing about the adult Shauna. She might have been the one who killed Adam, which caused a lot of issues for everybody else, but it's easy to forget that she is technically the catalyst, if not the center of a lot of the story. So with her deciding to tap into that badass side of her, pull that gun on that man and get the car back, you it acts like a periodic reminder that just because Shauna doesn't fit the perception of someone who, has that Misty vibe where you can tell that she's crazy, or the Natalie vibe when she's kind of messed up in the head and that's supposed to be the draw, that doesn't mean that she doesn't give something to the show. If anything, she's kind of like a phoenix that's just waiting to be reborn, and it's taken maybe longer than you want it to be, but as you start to see the fires and something's starting to crawl out of it, it's time to get excited. And I think we're at that point where Shauna is starting to become reborn, and we're going to get to see that person who definitely is probably more frightening than we often give her credit for. As for on the fence topic, I still don't get Natalie as a character, especially adult Natalie, because teen Natalie and adult Natalie just don't really gel well. I mean, yes, you have a similar voice, mannerisms, but a lot of the times it just feels like the way Juliette Lewis plays Natalie in present day is like a bad version of Teen Misty gone completely wrong, rather than Natalie evolving into her. And because of that, it just makes it so that I just can't get into Natalie, and I don't know if I ever may get into her. So I could only hope, as we've seen thus far, they keep attaching Natalie to better characters so that she's less of a Bane, Bruce, liability, whatever you want to say for this show. And whatever they're supposed to get out of having Juliette Lewis on the show, it can still get that. The last on the fence topic for me is just kind of the pacing of the series, and I don't know. Maybe it's because for most of the stuff that we watch, it's only really like 40 minutes, even though it's an hour drama, like Accused or Fantasy Island, stuff like that. But something about Yellowjackets, which actually almost fills an hour for each episode, even though only in episode 3, it feels like we're like halfway or more past that. And I don't know if it's because a lot of the stuff when it comes to the Yellowjackets kind of feels like filler, or it doesn't like really give you something to get excited about, and maybe that's why it feels so long. But either way, as noted throughout this episode review, there are starting to be signs that there are going to be things to get excited about. So I can only hope as things continue to progress, we're going to get the kind of show that we've been hoping for a while, and really lives up to the hype that was built up in season 1. Overall, Yellowjackets improves episode by episode, and with Thais' alter ego speaking, Shauna reminding us that she is brave and far more dangerous than given credit for, and Misty maybe getting a boyfriend, season 2 may have started more slow than it really should have, but it's starting to pick up quickly in a way that definitely is going to make it so that this show potentially won't have a sophomore slump.